I never expected my father to leave me with nothing. But when his lawyer read the will, my younger brother, Daniel, sat back and laughed, basking in his victory. He was the chosen one, the sole heir, while I was cast aside like I never existed. But Mom had always warned me, when the time comes, you'll know where to look. That night, I unlocked the safe she left behind. As I pulled out the papers inside, my brother's smirk disappeared. His laughter turned into sobs, because inside the safe was the one thing that could destroy him forever. I always knew how this would end. Sitting in my father's lawyer's office, listening to the final words of a man who never saw me as enough, I wasn't surprised. I should have been used to it by now, the way my father, William Carter, dismissed me, the way he always made it clear who his favorite child was. Ryan Carter, my younger brother, sat beside me, his arms crossed, his usual cocky smirk plastered across his face. He didn't even try to hide his amusement as the lawyer, Richard Dawson, read the will. And to my son, Ryan Carter, I leave Carter Enterprises, including all assets, properties, and financial holdings. Ryan barely moved, but I could feel the satisfaction radiating off him. Richard cleared his throat and continued, "To my daughter, Olivia Carter, I leave a small box containing family photographs and personal mementos." Silence filled the room. Ryan let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head as if this was all just a formality, a joke that played out exactly as expected. "Well, Olivia," he said, leaning back in his chair, "guess Dad really wanted you to have something sentimental, huh? Should make up for, well, everything else." I didn't flinch. I just stared straight ahead, my hands folded neatly in my lap. This moment, this very scene, I had rehearsed it in my head so many times. My father's voice, even in death, still found ways to push me aside, to remind me I was never the child he wanted. Ryan had always been the golden boy, the one who fit the mold. While I chose science, nature, and a life of research, Ryan followed in our father's footsteps: business deals, networking, wealth. He took the job at Carter Enterprises the moment he finished college, while I pursued environmental science, a field my father openly mocked. "You know how Dad felt about your career choices," Ryan continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. I turned to him, meeting his gaze for the first time since we walked into the office. I know exactly how he felt. Richard Dawson cleared his throat again, clearly eager to end this meeting without any drama. "If there are no disputes, we can conclude here." I stood up, smoothing my coat. "Are we done, Ryan?" Ryan shrugged, flashing his perfect, rehearsed smile. "Unless you'd like to contest Dad's wishes?" I shook my head. "No." I got exactly what I expected. And with that, I walked out. The drive home was quiet, the Chicago skyline casting long shadows as the sun dipped lower. My townhouse wasn't anything extravagant, but it was mine, fully paid for, mortgage-free. It was a home I had built for myself, without my father's money, without anyone's approval. As I stepped inside, I headed straight to my office. I knew exactly where it was, the envelope my mother had given me 2 years ago. I had never opened it, never even dared to peek. "Wait until after your father is gone," Mom had whispered to me the last time we sat together. Her voice had been weak, her hands frail, but her eyes had been sharp. "Promise me, Olivia." I had promised. And now it was time. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and carefully pulled out the thick envelope. My name was written in my mother's elegant handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I peeled back the flap and slid out the contents. There were documents. A lot of them. Real estate deeds. Investment portfolios. Bank statements. Company shares. My heart pounded as I flipped through them, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Then, at the very top, I found a letter. "My dearest Olivia, if you are reading this, your father is gone. And I have no doubt that he has done exactly what I feared. I knew he would leave you nothing, that he would give everything to Ryan, just as he always planned. But I need you to understand something. Your father was not the only one building a legacy. For the last 20 years, I have been investing, quietly, carefully. Your research, your dedication to environmental science, it inspired me. While your father dismissed it as foolish, I saw what you saw. And so, I built something of my own. Every investment, every asset, slowly and legally transferred into your name. It is yours, Olivia. And it is worth far more than Carter Enterprises. Your father never knew. And Ryan has no idea. Use it wisely, my darling girl. The future is yours now.
All my love, Mom.
I sat there, my mother's words sinking in, the weight of what she had done pressing down on me. My father had spent his life believing he controlled everything, that he had the power to shape the future. But my mother, the quiet, overlooked woman in the background, had outplayed him.
And Ryan?
He thought he had won. He thought he had it all. But he was about to learn the truth. I spent the night going through every document. $300 million in assets. Properties across the country. Investments in renewable energy, sustainable technology, conservation programs. My mother had built an empire that aligned with everything I believed in, and it was all mine. By the time the sun rose, I knew exactly what I had to do. At 9 a.m., I sent Ryan a message. Come to my house.
Now.
There's something you need to see. 15 minutes later, he pulled up in his sleek black car, stepping out in a perfectly tailored suit. He looked as confident as ever, like he owned the world. Olivia, he said, smirking. What's so urgent? Having second thoughts about taking Dad's old photos. I didn't respond. I simply stepped aside and let him in. Have a seat, I said, motioning toward the dining table. Neatly arranged on the polished wood surface were the documents, the investments, the bank statements, the signed legal transfers. Ryan's smirk faded the moment he picked up the first page. His brow furrowed. His fingers tightened around the paper. This he swallowed hard, flipping to the next page. Then the next. Where the hell did you get this? I leaned back against the chair, arms crossed. Mom left it for me. Turns out, while you and Dad were busy controlling Carter Enterprises, she was building something else. Something bigger. Ryan looked up, his face suddenly pale.
No.
No, this isn't real. It's very real, I said. Everything is verified. Every document is legal. Every cent is accounted for. And it's all in my name. Ryan's hands trembled slightly as he set the papers down. This is worth more than Carter Enterprises. I nodded. 10 times more. He shook his head, breathing heavily.
No.
This isn't happening. I tilted my head, studying him. You always thought Dad was the mastermind, that he was the one controlling everything. But Mom, she was 10 steps ahead of all of you. Ryan's jaw clenched. What do you want, Olivia? I smiled. I don't want anything, Ryan. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. But you? You just lost everything. And you don't even know it yet. Ryan's face was unreadable, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the slight twitch of his fingers as he clutched the papers. His entire life, he had believed he was untouchable, the chosen one, the heir to our father's empire. And now, sitting at my dining table, flipping through documents that proved otherwise, he was realizing that everything he had taken for granted had just slipped through his fingers. This isn't possible, he muttered under his breath. I tilted my head, watching him. Why not? Because, he let out a sharp breath and shook his head. Because Mom didn't know business. She didn't make investments. She didn't. She did. I interrupted. She just never let you or Dad know. While the two of you sat in boardrooms, pretending to run the world, Mom was playing the long game. Ryan's lips pressed into a thin line. He picked up another document, scanning it like he was searching for a mistake, some loophole, anything that could disprove what he was seeing. But there was nothing. 300 million, he whispered. This is worth more than everything Dad left behind. I shrugged.
Yeah.
It is. Silence filled the room. Then he laughed. A short, humorless chuckle as he leaned back in his chair. So what now, Olivia? He said, looking up at me with narrowed eyes. You're gonna throw this in my face? Rub it in? Maybe you want to buy me out of my own company. I exhaled slowly, keeping my expression neutral. I don't want Carter Enterprises. Ryan flinched slightly as if the words physically stung him. "You don't," he scoffed. "Of course you don't. You wouldn't know how to run it anyway." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's exactly what Dad used to say about Mom." Ryan's face darkened. He didn't like that comparison. I leaned forward, my voice calm, measured. "She was smarter than both of you. And now, everything she built is mine. So tell me, Ryan, what does that make you?" His expression hardened, but I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. Ryan had spent his life believing he had won by default, that his position in our family meant he would always come out on top. But now, for the first time in his life, he was losing. He shoved the papers away and stood abruptly. "This doesn't change anything." I arched a brow. "Doesn't it?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stormed toward the door, yanking it open so hard it slammed against the wall. "You think this means you've won, Olivia?" He turned back to me, his jaw tight. "We'll see about that." Then he was gone. I sat there for a moment, staring at the empty space where he had stood. I had expected anger, denial, but something about the way he left unsettled me. Ryan wasn't just mad. He was planning something. I knew him too well, and I had a feeling he wasn't going down without a fight. I spent the rest of the day preparing. My first call was to Emily Foster, my mother's lawyer, who had helped her manage these investments for years. She picked up on the first ring. "Right on schedule," Emily said, her tone light, but I could hear the seriousness beneath it. "I assume Ryan knows now." "Oh, he knows," I said, rubbing my temple. "And he's not taking it well." Emily sighed. "I figured. Your mother predicted he'd try to challenge the holdings." I swallowed. "Can he?" "No," a pause. "But he'll try." That was what I was afraid of. My second call was to Dr. Ethan Blake, a leading researcher in renewable energy. He was the one my mother had been funding behind the scenes, pouring millions into sustainable technology development. When I told him who I was, he fell silent. "Your mother was our anonymous benefactor," he said after a long pause. "We've been trying to find a way to thank her for years." "She believed in your work," I told him, "and I want to keep supporting it." We made plans to meet later that week. Mom had built something incredible, and I wasn't about to let it die. By the time I finally sat down that evening, exhaustion crept in. Everything had changed in less than 24 hours, and I knew it was only the beginning. Then, just as I was about to turn off my phone, Ryan called. I hesitated before answering. "Ryan," I said evenly. There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. Then his voice, calm, measured, too controlled. "We need to talk." I exhaled slowly. "We already did." "Not like this," he said. "Dinner. Tomorrow night. Just us." I frowned. This wasn't like Ryan. He never asked. He demanded. Still, I needed to know what he was up to.
"Fine," I said.
"I'll see you tomorrow." The next night, we met at a high-end restaurant downtown, one of the places Ryan used to bring Dad's business partners to impress them. He was already seated when I arrived, his suit crisp, his demeanor perfectly composed. "You look like you're taking this well," I said as I sat across from him. He gave me a slow smile. "I always land on my feet, Olivia." I wasn't so sure this time. The conversation started off polite, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way. And I was right. Halfway through dinner, Ryan leaned forward. "So, tell me, Olivia," he said, his voice casual, but his eyes sharp. "What's your plan?" I set my fork down. "My plan?" He gestured vaguely. "You suddenly have all this money, all this power. What are you going to do with it?" I studied him carefully. This wasn't just curiosity. He was trying to figure out his next move. "I'm investing in something real," I said simply. "Something that matters." Ryan exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. "You sound just like Mom." That wasn't an insult. But then, he leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass. "You know, Olivia," he said, his voice smooth, "Carter Enterprises isn't doing so well right now." I didn't react. "I could use a little help," he continued. "A business investment. Something mutually beneficial." I almost laughed. "You want my money?" Ryan shrugged, as if it was the most reasonable thing in the world. It would be a smart move. Keep the family legacy strong. I met his gaze. There it was. The desperation creeping in. I'm not interested, I said simply. Ryan's smile didn't waver, but I saw his fingers tighten around his glass. You sure about that? I nodded. Very. He stared at me for a long moment, then leaned in slightly. And that's when his mask slipped. I wouldn't be so quick to dismiss me, Olivia, he said, his voice low. You might have all the money now, but I still have the connections, the power, and I can make things very difficult for you. I didn't blink. I had expected a fight, but I wasn't afraid of him. Try me, I said. Ryan's jaw tensed. For a split second, I thought he might actually lunge across the table. Then, just like that, his expression smoothed out. He let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. Well, he said, standing up and tossing a few bills on the table. I guess we'll see how this plays out. He turned and walked out without another word. I sat there for a long time, staring after him. I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't over. Not even close. I knew Ryan well enough to understand that when he walked out of that restaurant, he wasn't admitting defeat. He was regrouping, planning, figuring out a way to take back what he thought was rightfully his. And I was right. The next morning, I woke up to 15 missed calls. Not just from Ryan, but from extended family members, old acquaintances, even Carter Enterprises board members. Word had spread fast. I barely had time to process the storm that was coming before my phone rang again. This time, it was Emily Foster. Olivia, she said, straight to the point. Ryan's making moves. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Of course he is. What is it this time? He's calling in favors, she continued. Reaching out to influential investors, trying to paint you as a threat. He's telling them you're reckless, that you don't understand business, that you're putting Carter Enterprises in danger. I closed my eyes for a moment, forcing down the frustration. So, he's playing the victim now? Exactly, Emily said. And it's working. The board is panicking. Investors are nervous. They see you as a wild card, and Ryan is using that fear to rally support against you. I let out a slow breath. It wasn't enough for Ryan to have our father's empire. He needed to make sure I had nothing. He couldn't stand the idea of me winning. Let him try, I said finally. Emily hesitated. Olivia, this could get ugly. I know, I admitted. But I'm ready. I spent the rest of the day preparing. Ryan wanted to play dirty. Fine. I could play smarter. By the time evening rolled around, my lawyer, my financial advisors, and I had gone through every possible move Ryan could make. His best bet was to try and legally challenge my mother's holdings, to claim that she was unfit when she transferred them to me. But Mom had been 10 steps ahead of him. Every investment had been meticulously documented, every transaction legally airtight. There was nothing he could take from me. I was poring over the final details when my phone buzzed again. A text from Ryan. We need to talk. Now. I almost ignored it, but something about his tone felt different. This wasn't cocky, arrogant Ryan. This was desperate Ryan. I sighed, grabbed my keys, and headed to the one place I knew he'd be, our father's old office. Ryan was already there when I arrived, sitting behind the massive oak desk that had once belonged to Dad. He looked rough. His usual flawless appearance was gone, his tie was loosened, his sleeves rolled up, his face tense. He gestured for me to sit. I didn't. Say what you need to say, Ryan. He let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. Carter Enterprises is sinking, Olivia. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. I know. He let out a humorless chuckle. Of course you do. You've been waiting for this, haven't you? I narrowed my eyes. Don't twist this, Ryan. You did this to yourself. You and Dad ignored every warning, refused to adapt. You thought the world would bend to your will. But business doesn't work like that. Ryan sat forward, his elbows on the desk, his gaze sharp. We can fix it, he said. Together. I blinked. Excuse me? You and me, he continued. We merge what Mom built with Carter Enterprises. We take the investors who still trust me, combine them with your sustainability projects, and rebuild I stared at him. He was serious. You want me to save your company? Ryan clenched his jaw. It's our company, Olivia. The Carter name. The Carter name means nothing to me. I cut him off. It never did. Ryan looked like he had been slapped. You think I enjoy this? He snapped. You think I want to be sitting here, asking for help? I built this company. I worked for this. Dad trained me for this. And look where it got you, I said quietly. Silence. For the first time in his life, Ryan had no comeback. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. You don't understand, Olivia. If Carter Enterprises collapses, I lose everything. I tilted my head. So, you only care now because it's your future on the line? Ryan's jaw tightened.
No.
I care because he hesitated. Then, softer, because this is all I have left. I wanted to feel bad for him, but I couldn't. Not after everything. Then maybe, I said, you should have thought about that before you tried to destroy me. Ryan flinched. He looked away, running a hand through his hair. His voice, when he spoke, was hollow.
So, that's it?
You're just going to let me fail? I sighed.
No, Ryan.
You let yourself fail. I turned to leave, but he grabbed my wrist. Not rough, not aggressive, just desperate. Please, he whispered. I hesitated. For the first time, Ryan wasn't talking like our father's son. He wasn't mocking me, manipulating me, trying to win. He was just my brother. And then, like a switch flipping, his grip tightened. You think you're so much better than me, don't you? He hissed. You think you won? I yanked my arm free. You're unbelievable. He stood abruptly, knocking over a stack of papers. You're walking away from family. You're turning your back on everything we built. You turned your back on me a long time ago, Ryan, I said, voice steady. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. Do you know what happens to people like you, Olivia? He said darkly. People who don't know their place? I swallowed. There it was. The real Ryan. I met his gaze, unflinching.
Yeah, Ryan.
They win. I walked out. By the time I got home, I knew I had made the right decision. Ryan wasn't sorry. He wasn't looking for redemption. He was looking for a way to stay in control. And I wasn't going to let him. The next morning, headlines broke. Carter Enterprises faces crisis. CEO under fire as investors pull out. The stock had dropped another 15% overnight. I expected Ryan to call, to lash out, to fight. But he didn't. Because Ryan was out of moves. And he knew it. I sat at my desk, staring at the final document I had been waiting to sign. The one my mother had planned for years. The one that would end Carter Enterprises for good. I picked up my pen.
And I signed.
Because this wasn't revenge. This was justice. I always thought revenge would feel different. That the moment I finally signed the papers, when I made the final move that would bring Carter Enterprises crumbling down, I would feel something.
Victory.
Satisfaction. Maybe even peace. But as I put the pen down and stared at my signature, all I felt was the weight of it. Ryan hadn't called me in 2 days. Not since the stock dropped, not since the board turned against him, not since the headlines started ripping him apart. I expected him to fight back, to lash out, to try one last desperate attempt to fix what was already broken. But there was nothing. That was how I knew he had finally realized the truth. It was over. I wasn't surprised when, a few hours later, my doorbell rang. I knew who it would be before I even opened the door. Ryan stood on my doorstep, but he wasn't the man I had last seen in our father's office. His suit was wrinkled, his tie was gone, and for the first time in his life, he looked lost. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he let out a slow breath. Can I come in? I stepped aside. Ryan walked in, looking around like he had never really seen my home before. Maybe he hadn't. In his mind, I had always been less than him, less important, less valuable, less worthy. Now I had everything, and he had nothing. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. What do you want, Ryan? He sat down at the dining table, the same table where I had first shown him Mom's documents. It felt like a lifetime ago. I lost everything, he said quietly.
I didn't say anything.
I thought I could fix it, he continued. I thought. He ran a hand through his hair. I don't know what I thought. You thought you could control everything, I said. Just like Dad did. Ryan let out a bitter laugh.
Yeah.
And look where it got me. He looked up at me, something unreadable in his eyes. Do you hate me, Olivia? The question caught me off guard. Did I? For years, Ryan had been the golden child, the one our father groomed, the one who had everything handed to him. And in return, he had laughed at me, belittled me, sided with Dad every time. He had been cruel, arrogant, selfish. But standing here now, stripped of everything, he wasn't that person anymore. I sighed, rubbing my temples. I don't hate you, Ryan. He looked away, swallowing hard. Mom would have hated what I became. I didn't argue. For a long time, there was only silence. Then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He placed it on the table and slid it toward me. I hesitated before picking it up. It was a resignation letter. I'm stepping down, he said. The board already knows. They're bringing in a temporary CEO while they decide what to do next. I stared at the letter, then at him. Why now? Ryan exhaled. Because I finally get it, Olivia. He leaned back, his voice tired, hollow. Dad spent his whole life thinking money and power were the only things that mattered. And I spent my whole life trying to live up to that. But in the end, none of it saved me. He shook his head. You were right. Mom was right. Carter Enterprises is dead. And I was too blind to see it. For the first time since this all started, Ryan sounded like my brother again. I sat down across from him, folding my hands on the table. So, what happens now? Ryan let out a breath. I don't know. I have nothing left. I studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, I reached into my own stack of papers and pulled out an envelope.
He frowned.
What's that? I slid it across the table. Mom's final instruction. He hesitated, then picked it up and unfolded the letter inside. I watched his face as he read, watched the way his fingers trembled slightly as he took in Mom's last words. Despite everything, Ryan is still your brother. He was just as much a victim of your father's world as you were. He simply coped differently. If he ever shows signs of change, offer him the chance to be better. When he finished reading, his hands clenched around the letter. He blinked rapidly, like he was trying to hold something back. I cleared my throat. Mom left a fund. An environmental education program. It's already set up, but it needs someone to manage it. Ryan looked at me, his expression unreadable. You're giving it to me? I'm offering it to you. I corrected. It's your choice. For a long time, he didn't say anything. Then, finally, he let out a shaky breath. I don't deserve this. Maybe not, I said honestly. But that's the thing about second chances. You have to earn them. Ryan swallowed, looking down at the letter again. After a long moment, he nodded. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't easy. But over the next few months, Ryan changed. He threw himself into the work, learning everything he could about sustainability, conservation, and education. He wasn't perfect, he still had his temper, his sharp edges, but for the first time he was trying. And that was enough. On what would have been Mom's birthday, we stood in her garden. Ryan touched one of the rose bushes, his fingers gentle against the petals. She tried to get me interested in this stuff when we were kids, he murmured.
Try to teach me about balance.
I never listened. I smiled. She never gave up on either of us. Ryan looked at me then, something raw in his expression. I'm sorry, Olivia. For the first time in our lives, I believed him. I reached out and took his hand. It's never too late, I said. That night, as I sat in my office, I looked at the two pictures on my desk. One of Mom, kneeling in her garden, teaching me about nature. And one of Ryan, standing in front of a classroom of children, teaching them about marine conservation. Mom had played the long game. Not just with money, not just with business, but with us. And in the end, she had won.